Hello friends, the topic of discussion for today is Hindi films and Mehboob Khan, and it is the lecture for symbolic expression, and as an expert we have Manisha Sharma with us. And as all of us are aware that how cinema is an important source of entertainment, education, information and communication, and many of the filmmakers, the way they have presented their films, they have talked about the various socio-economic, political and cultural issues which are concerned with society. And Mehboob Khan is one such filmmaker. Through his films he has tried to raise the awareness in the society, as well as also in a way try to present the society in a manner which is comparatively more relevant in the context that the kind of changes which were happening, because he was a filmmaker who was making films before independence, and thereafter also he was engaged in making films. And some of his most important films also include Mother India, which was made in 1957, and it was a remake of a film called Aurat, which he made in 1940, that is before the independence. And we find that the way he tried to tackle the issues of women, the way they were being projected and how empowered they were being shown in his films, also reflects some kind of a sensitivity and understanding about the way women's issues they have been tackled in India. So, in the course of our discussion, we'll try to talk about the various films which have been made by Mehboob Khan, apart from the ones which we have talked about. We'll talk about Amar, for example, which was again made with Dilip Kumar as the lead. And there were some others, I think one of them was Deccan Queen, which was a stunt film of those times or action film of today's times. So we will talk about all these kinds of films which were made by Mehboob Khan and try to situate them in some kind of a relevance from the socio-economic, political, cultural perspective. In the framework of the readings, you can see Rauf Ahmed Mehboob Khan. On the screen you can see The Legends of Indian Cinema, then Gulzar et al., Encyclopedia of Hindi Cinema, Films of Mehboob Khan, and then wikipedia.com. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about the films of Mehboob Khan. And as I told you that how cinema nowadays being studied in the framework that it is considered to be one of the tools of history writing. And we also see that not only the kind of dialogues which are there in the films, but at the same time a number of symbols which are there, they are considered to be part and parcel of a social and historical context. And how these symbols, they in a way generate the emotions and they excite a large number of masses at the same time. So, in a way, symbols definitely play an important role in creating the appropriate emotional response or climate among the audience. And we find that how during that point of time when Mehboob Khan was initiated into filmmaking, that was the period of the colonial rule and the period of the national movement as well. And how nationalist aspirations or motives they got in a way portrayed in the cinema of those times. We have also seen that how the question of fashion and as well as the ideas, they also got some kind of a promotion through the films which have been made. And the question of identity has also been paramount in the question of making films. We have seen that how cinema basically is also talking about a number of cultural aspects, and it is also in the framework of the kind of norms of behavior or the way we dress, makeup, our gestures, eating, drinking behavior, all that becomes part of our cultural aspirations. And in a way, Raymond Williams has argued that how culture can be seen as a way of life. So from that perspective, when we try to understand the films which have been made by Mehboob Khan, we try to situate them in a particular kind of a context and seeing them as harbingers or messengers of some kind of a or as some kind of a cultural product. So when you talk about the period of Mehboob Khan, that how he was also a producer as well as the director of Hindi cinema, and as I told you that he made the social epic Mother India in 1957, as you can see on the screen as well. and he also started a production company known as the Mehboob Productions, and film studio Mehboob Studio was also established in 1954. So we find that how the commemorative stamp of Mehboob Khan was also launched at a function at Mehboob Studio in 2007. So the government of India in a way wanted to recognize the kind of work which has been done by Mehboob Khan, and it was done through the commemorative stamp by the government of India in 2007. So we find that how filmmakers like Mehboob Khan, V. Shantaram, for example, how they were instrumental in making some kind of meaningful films during that particular point of time. And when we tend to understand the colonial period, we find that not only from the Indian point of view, but at the international level also, a number of changes they were taking place at that point of time. For example, the socialist revolution of 1917, for example, Indian communist movement, labor and the peasant movements, progressive cultural movements like Progressive Writers Association and Indian People's Theatres Association, PWA and IPTA, the rejection of religious orthodoxy and the establishment of the new values and ideas in socio-cultural sphere, emancipation of women, and the role of the Indian national movement. So we find that at that point of time various strands they were functioning in the society, and not only the labor and the peasant movements but also the communist movement was taking root in the first half of the 20th century in India. And that was also as a result of the socialist revolution of 1917 in Russia, and how it was able to in a way create an impact in other regions as well. And we also see the number of cultural movements which got initiated during this point of time. As I told you, Progressive Writers Association and the Indian People's Theatres Association, and both these organizations, they were also a number of filmmakers, script writers, etc. They were also associated with both of them, and how they were also functioning in the film spectrum, as well as they were active in these movements as well. So we find that how the issue of emancipation of women was an important concern at that point of time, and a number of leaders during the national movement, they raised the issue of women and how the emancipation of women and thereafter the empowerment of women should take place. And for that All India Women's Conference was established in 1927, so that women from different strata of the society they come together and then they lead their movement. And that was also the period of the Indian national movement, as I told you, that how the various phases of the Indian national movement, beginning from the moderates, thereafter the extremist phase, also the revolutionaries, how revolutionaries they were playing an important role in terms of raising the consciousness of the masses, and at the same time the kind of individual heroism which was displayed by them, in a way sacrificing their own lives for the cause of the nation. And then the Gandhian phase, and how Gandhi was instrumental in a way leading a number of movements. And from the national point of view, we see the non-cooperation movement, then the civil disobedience movement, and the Quit India movement. So all these three important movements which were launched by Gandhi, and so many people they in a way associated with these kinds of movements. And thereafter we also see the role of INA, the Indian National Army, and the Royal Indian Navy, the RIN, all how they revolted against the colonial rule, and they also played their part. So in that background, when we tend to understand the various kinds of films which were made during this particular period, we find that Mehboob Khan in a way was also concerned with various kinds of themes on which these films were made. For example, socials, which we were talking about, the emancipation of women, as you can see on the screen as well. Then the question of equality, welfare in agrarian life, egalitarianism. Stunt films were talking about the question of legitimacy, right and wrong. Then Muslim socials, they focus on education and culture. and the question of modernity, tradition, and their interplay. So we find that how Mehboob Khan was concerned with all these kinds of themes, and in a number of films which were made by him, he was raising such kind of questions as well. And for example, in the context of the emancipation of women, or welfare in agrarian life, Aurat and Mother India, both of them, they are considered to be one of the best films in that particular framework. Or the Deccan Queen, in the context of the stunt films, which were talking about the legitimacy and the illegitimacy during the colonial period, whether the British, they were the legitimate rulers of India, and whether they should continue in that particular framework. And as we all of us are aware, that the tradition and modernity and their interplay is a continuous kind of a process, and how the kind of ideas which are in modern sphere in present times will become tradition over a period of time in future. And similarly, the traditions of today's times might have been the concerns of modernity in an earlier period when they came. So their interplay is also very important, and how these kinds of things, they were also being shown in the films, that we can also understand. We also have seen that he made a film called Deccan Queen in 1936, and it was his first stunt film from the Sagar movie tone, as that was a period of the studio system. And film actor Surendra Nath BALLB, he was the actor in that film. And this was about the two legitimate heirs to the property. They are cheated out of their inheritance by the fraudulent trustees. So we find that how the studio system of those times, where various kinds of actors, actresses, and technicians, they were on the payrolls of the studio, they were working as the employees. And the star system was in a way came during the 1940s, after the Second World War, when we find that the star system became comparatively more dominant. And this issue of writing about their degrees, BA and LB, because films basically were considered to be an inferior profession in those times, and it was being. The film talks about the two legitimate heirs to the property and how they are being cheated out of their inheritance by the fraudulent trustees. So this idea of legitimacy and illegitimacy, that was being talked about in this particular kind of a film. And we also find that one legitimate heir is indiscriminated in a crime for which he has to go to jail. And when she is being released from jail, she has vengeance on her mind, and then she becomes the fearful Deccan Queen. So these kinds of ideas, they were being exhibited in the films, and how during this time the question of legitimacy and illegitimacy during the colonial period was very, very important. And how filmmakers like Mehboob Khan, they were aware about such kind of issues, and they tried to project them in the kind of films which were made by them. We also see that in this particular film, how the Deccan Queen and one of the characters, Vrinda, as you can see on the screen, they resemble each other. And after a number of action scenes in the kidnapping of Vrinda by Aruna, things are sorted out. So the police inspector played, one of the police inspector played by Suresh, he helps the Deccan Queen reveal the dishonest trustees. So the stunt films could also be seen in the context of the national movement, that how British, they were occupying the Indian state or Indian country in an illegitimate manner. And we also find that other stunt films during this period also, they were also trying to project such kind of ideas when they were trying to show the issues of legitimacy and illegitimacy. And whenever we find that there was a climax scene, that how the person who has been shown to be a poor person, and there are people those who are shown to be rich, and how the rich, they are trying to in a way take away all the goods which are there with the poor, and poor, they have the legitimate right over them. And finally, many a times in these films we see that the legitimate rulers, they in a way succeeded, and British, they were shown to be the illegitimate leaders in that sense. So stunt films, in that point of view, they were patriotic in nature, and they advocated the idea of democracy, and they had this nationalist overtones as well. And the climax scene, basically they witnessed the verbal confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist, in which people's rights of democracy, good governance, justice and freedom of speech and expression, they were being advocated. And finally we see that how the victory of good over evil and legitimate over legitimate, it sharpened the people's desire for freedom. So all these kinds of portrayals which were talking about all these kinds of ideas in the stunt films, they were some kind of a fodder for the patriotic and the nationalist feelings, and it in a way generated or sharpened the desire of the people to achieve independence. We also see that how Mehboob Khan, for that matter, made a film called Manmohan in 1936, and it was viewed as a poor man's Devdas. So if you have seen Devdas, that how Devdas was made in 1935, and it was made with K.L. Sehgal in Hindi version and P.C. Barua in the Bengali version, and it was also based on a novel. And how Devdas was a film which has been made later in 1955 with Dilip Kumar, and thereafter with Shah Rukh Khan in the year 2000. And another version, Devdi, of Devdas was also made in the 21st century. So we see that there are various kinds of portrayals or depictions of this particular film. And as we have talked about, that it was seen as a poor man's Devdas, in which how the artist Ashok, played by Surendra, has fallen for the beautiful orphan Vimla, played by Bibbo, and how she is engaged to marry villainous Jagdish, played by Yakub, and how distraught Ashok paints the portrait after portrait of his love in a frenzy of romantic and creative passion. And we find that much to the Jagdish's distress, the paintings gain a following, and soon Ashok is famous. And Ashok's family assets, they are quickly dwindling, and he takes to alcoholism. And this self-destruction or rebellion against the society could also be seen in the framework of Devadas. And even when one talks about Guru Dutt's Pyasa, where the shades of loser figure, they could also be seen. So we find that the kind of portrayals which were made by Mehboob Khan, they also in a way inspired the later generation of filmmakers, for example Guru Dutt and Pyasa, for that matter, or even many of the films which were made in 1950s and 60s. And we find that his portrayal of these kinds of characters or ideas, they were also concerned with the times of the national movement, because he made a film called Watan in 1938, and this film was set in a fictionalized place in Central Asia. And the tyrannical Russian king Siddiqui is committing atrocities against the Cossacks, and how the Cossacks, they fight for independence. So there is a symbolic reference to the independence from the British rule in India in this particular film. And so such kind of portrayals, how they found some kind of a resonance during the national movement, they were relevant from that point of view. And the Russian general Murad is sympathetic towards Cossacks and is arrested for his treachery. And the way he manages to escape with the help of Princess Nigar, who falls in love with Murad, they plan a coup and they are successful in routing Tsar and his men. So such kind of portrayals, they in a way were also resembling the ideas of independence. They were also talking about the ideas of patriotism, and how these ideas of patriotism, democracy, how they were in a way relevant from the point of view of India. So we will further talk about the films of Mehboob Khan in our next lecture the other films which he has made and how these films they have been successful not only from the commercial point of view, but at the same time how they were relevant from the socio-economic, political and cultural point of view, and were able to inspire the later filmmakers as well. Thank you very much.